World building games is, without a doubt, one of the hardest and most fun parts to handle. This only intensifies when you think about how many games have already been created before, making it increasingly difficult to do something different or fun enough. But some games manage to do this in a completely innovative way, creating worlds that we don't necessarily see, but we understand almost perfectly how they are built, and even more, we perceive how they are increasingly filled as we play. But how? The universe of VA11 Halley, or Valhalla, is nothing extremely new, a cyberpunk world with its typical problems and bright neons everywhere. But the impressive part of this world is that you don't see it during the entire gameplay. The game starts with a brief cutscene, introducing the story and Glitch City, the city where it takes place. However, even this cutscene presents us with nothing more than just 2 paragraphs about the world before throwing us into it. So, how does Valhalla manage to develop a world so well that the player barely sees? First, for those who don't know, Valhalla is a visual novel, a genre of games based mainly on the textual narrative, where you follow Jill's journey as a bartender in a cyberpunk city, serving eccentric customers and even advanced models of conscious robots. There's a talking dog too, but let's ignore him. The game is relatively simple. We have the pixel art sprites of the characters in the bar, our drinks to mix, a great playlist to accompany us during work, and that's all. Like a good old visual novel, the dialogues are what really move the game. Which leads us to the first way Valhalla reveals its world to us, and what really excites me about this type of game. We don't see Glitch City, instead, we hear about it. The characters of Valhalla, in addition to telling us about themselves, also give this depth to the city streets, telling cases and reports that occur daily with them or that they observe. And, fortunately for us players, the characters are not simple receptacles for the city's contextualization, especially because they are the main part of the game. All the characters in Valhalla play a perfect role in the story, being completely alive. Most of them appear to have a more caricatured profile, which gives us our first impression, but with every drink we serve them and every dialogue we have, they show themselves to be deeper and with several layers that one wouldn't expect, which is something I find incredible. Because the game gives you one facet to judge and base what you think of a character on, and gradually polishes that first impression you created of them. Since we are in a bar, it is also very important that we do our job well and serve them as best as possible, which requires us to know a little about the characters to know what they really need at the moment. In this way, we get to know more and more about the characters, who talk more and more about themselves and others, and as a result, the world around the protagonist keeps extending. To exemplify, in Glitch City there are the White Knights, who are a kind of government force to ensure that citizens follow the laws and rules, and, initially, keep everything safe and under control. But we don't know much about this organization until Sei, one of the bar's customers, reveals to us that she is a member of this force. The dialogues with Sei, besides developing the character herself, also develop this part of the city's history as a consequence of her participation in all of this. And we can see in a phenomenal way the game making the character affect and be affected by the world around her. Now that is a good writing, and this type of development is present throughout the entire game and with various characters, part of what makes Valhalla so special. Another way Valhalla uses to add more layers of depth to the world is the news. Upon starting the game, the first things after the cutscenes and the prologue that we have access to is the protagonist in her room with her cell phone. And it is here that the game presents one of the main experiences we live through, the newspapers. Every day, before going to work, Jill checks her phone, which allows us to read various daily news reports that comment on events and happenings in the world, and especially in Glitch City. In this way, we find out about the troubled government, about shows by famous bands, among others. And they are not just news stories with no connection to the protagonist's life, because Valhalla wouldn't stop there. The other characters actively comment on these events in their dialogues. Of course, you can proceed through the game without reading absolutely everything, but in my view, it will be an extremely more incomplete gameplay experience, as many subjects throughout the game's dialogues occasionally recall some recent event, which might go unnoticed by some, but gives us a sense of satisfaction to see that the context you read that morning was actually worked on, besides letting us understand Glitch City a bit more. A good example of this in action is the character Kiramiki, an idol who visits the bar a few times before her shows, and who frequently appears in the Augmented Eye, Jill's main news app. It is not completely crucial information, but news like "You wouldn't believe this Kiramiki's secret" or announced concert dates gives a bit more life to these characters in the world, making the city actually move while in play and not just stand still. Another detail that gives an even greater touch of personality to this part of the game is that at certain moments during the gameplay, we meet two employees of the Augmented Eye, Kim, a simple assistant, and Donovan, the CEO of the newspaper. And as the days go by, when serving drinks to Donovan, we have the option of adding optional Carmotrin to his beverages, Carmotrin being the alcoholic factor of the drink. In this way, we can choose whether or not to get Donovan drunk, and with that, the newspaper's news in the following days changes based on what choice you made, with news like fuck the world if he got drunk, and more sober news if he didn't. And to conclude about Valhalla, I couldn't forget to talk about Jill Stingray, the game's protagonist. We are constantly listening to the characters during the game, but the one who really listens to them, judges them, and responds to them is her, our protagonist. A good protagonist is always difficult to handle, after all, they are present in basically every moment, but Jill hits the mark as the main character of this story. She has the main points she needs to work, a personality of her own, distinct behaviors from the other characters, and especially flaws. Jill is a person who is very driven by regrets, and this weighs heavily in the character, actions and speeches. This allows us to relate to her, and since she is the protagonist, we usually end up having greater empathy for the things she suffered and went through, shaping our sense of judgment throughout the story in a certain way. Fortunately, Jill perfectly complements Valhalla, mainly by being such a human character who really seems to exist in this world. Jill makes sense as a person, and this makes the experience even closer to the player. Now, talking about another game that also does a great job of creating a world in the background, and is also one of my favorites, is the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, a game where Fortuna, a witch, was exiled and condemned to wander alone and without her tarot deck for a millennium. To get rid of the loneliness, Fortuna decides to use a forbidden ritual and summon a Baned Behemoth, thus managing to create a deck with which she can return to using her divination skills. The main mechanic of the game is similar to Valhalla in certain aspects. Eventually, Fortuna becomes able to receive visitors again in her exile, and from that, we meet several new characters or characters from the protagonist's past, and then we talk to them and read their fortune. In this way, we learn more about the game's universe just like in Valhalla, hearing through the characters' dialogues. But in addition, the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood uses some interesting and different complementary methods, which would be the equivalent of the game's newspaper that we talked about earlier. Besides the dialogues with the characters, here we also have the cards and the divination itself. Throughout the game, we built our own new deck with several different elements, being able to make distinct combinations. We can even assemble this deck and organize the symbols however we want, which definitely makes the gameplay 10 times more fun and gives us the feeling that the deck is truly yours. These elements contain small fragments of stories from the world, such as the Demonic Desertlands, one of the sceneries we can use to build the cards. We discovered that it is the home of Dahlia, one of Fortuna's best friends, and that she hunts demons there for her dagger crafting, which is one of the character's main traits. Thus, we discovered that the elements are real things in place, and in this way, we can discover more of the world, even without actively exploring it. In addition, a more subtle form of world building is when we read the cards for the game's characters. Different reading options are offered to us based on the type of the card, and then we choose based on what we think fits the situation best. But regardless of the answer we give, this also gives us some context of things that would fit the history of the character in the world. Although we don't take reading X as true, for example, we still know that it would be possible. And who doesn't like choice-based games, right? And well, besides all that, the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood also has several tales and poems that you can read within the game itself as small separate stories. They don't tell us much about the world, but even so, I really love this type of activity within games. The newspapers in Valhalla, the tales in the Cosmic Wheel Sisterhood, and the short prose in Coffee Talk, which we didn't talk about in this video, but maybe in the next one, they all have a place in my heart, because in addition to give us more depth to the game, they remind me that all these games are full of life, that artists strove to put their ideas and their own being into that work. There's no way around it, I am truly in love with art, and I hope that by showing you this kind of thing, I can also make you realize how incredible it is.